Linkage. My name is Hugh Williamson from the University of Exeter. I'm one of the co-organisers of this workshop together with my colleague Sabina Leonelli. Before we start, I'd just like to thank our funders for this, which is the University of Exeter and the Alan Turing Institute for our project From Field Data to Global Indicators. Housekeeping notes before we start: that all cameras off and microphones muted by default, particularly when we've got talks ongoing. Anyone who wants to ask a question of speakers, you post a question in the chat or use the Q&A tool, or you can raise your hand and intervene in person. Please note that offence or abuse of language or behaviour of any kind result in immediate and permanent removal from the event. And thank you for respecting the rules and for joining us today. So the schedule for today is as follows. This session is broadly on governance challenges, but as we've said in previous sessions, the thematic organisation is relatively loose and something that we'll determine later when we're producing the volume from this session. So we're going to start with a talk called Governing the Agricultural Data Web. And that's presented by Meda Devare from IFPRI, Elizabeth Arnaud from the Alliance of Biodiversity International SIAT, Brian King from the CG Big Data Platform, and they've recently been joined by Erik Antezana from Bayer Crop Science and Norwegian University of Science and Technology. That'll be followed by a talk entitled Creating a Digital Marketplace for Agrobiodiversity and Plant Genetic Sequence Data, Legal and Ethical Considerations of an AI and Blockchain-Based Solution by Mrinalini Kuchupilai from Technical University of Munich and Julia Koeniger from the University of Vigo. Then a slight change to the schedule after this, we will have collaboration in crop diversity management, community of practice and responsible data production linkages by Salim Louafi from CIRAD and colleagues. I won't name everyone there, particularly because my French accent probably isn't good enough for it. And then finally, rather than the third position, in the fourth position, we'll have digital sequence information and genetic resources, global policy meets interoperability by Daniele Manzella and Marco Marcella from the International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, Pankaj Jaiswal from Oregon State University, and again, Elizabeth Arnaud and Brian King. So just generally to summarize again the themes of the workshop, we're trying to think about bringing together the technical and socio-political aspects of plant data linkage through very transdisciplinary and historically informed exchanges that bring together people from a lot of different backgrounds, of data scientists, plant researchers, curators of data collections, international organizations, some work in agricultural development, together with historians, social scientists, and philosophers working on these topics. We want to think about the ethical and governance aspects as informing the development of data infrastructures, standards and research. And this is something that is being much better addressed in fields such as biomedicine rather than plant science and related agricultural research fields. It's very important for agricultural development and including progress towards sustainable development goals. This is the third of 4 sessions. As I said, the thematic organisation is relatively open here because we're working towards the production of a volume which we hope to be published in 2022. And the format is going to be 15-minute presentations by the different speakers, followed by 10 minutes of discussion each. We'll be recording the presentations, but not the Q&A. So that'll be completely open for everyone to discuss as they like, and the Q&A will include questions on drafts that have been pre-circulated among the speakers, which will largely be summarised in the presentations. So with that in mind, I think I will stop sharing my screen and then hand over to our first speakers, which will be Meda and colleagues.
Thanks, Hugh and Sabina. I hope you can hear me. I'm going to share my screen, which hopefully you'll be able to see. Right, so I'm sharing my screen now. And as Hugh mentioned, this paper was prepared by myself with Elizabeth, Brian, and we're just lately, as of yesterday, I think, joined by Erik. So welcome, Erik. What we're going to be talking about is kind of a, it's loosely about governance. We do try to address governance issues, but it's also very much incorporating elements from the last 2 sessions, the view from the trenches, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought we would start by framing, again, reminding us all of why we're doing this. We at CGIAR work primarily with smallholders in developing countries. And increasingly, even in developing countries, just like in many of the more developed regions. We see an increasing reliance on big data and sort of the emerging data advances in data technologies. The problem, of course, with all of these or trying to leverage all of these is the fact that many of them come with their own different standards. And so trying to be able to get to more data-driven solutions, being able to interpret, aggregate, visualize and analyze the data in ways that we need to is not that easy. It's getting easier perhaps, but it's still quite challenged. What are the models? Where can we what do we have as sort of the shining beacons to look at? And I think this isn't probably going to be a very great news to you all, but the biomedical domain, of course, through NCBI, through the open COVID work that's been leveraged to great effect recently, has shown us a path to doing this. The ecologists have done quite a lot of good work through making data discoverable and accessible, as well as interoperable through the very large Data One initiative. And I noticed that I haven't included links there. I will try to do that when I share back the slides. So these are examples for us that form good models for us to follow. Too often when we're in agriculture, we're very much talking about, my data standard. We call it a standard, or a company might call it a standard, but really in reality, it only applies to that company. And that's a real problem. In the agriculture domain, though, at least from the point of view of research, largely, we have made some strides. And you can see this at the with the USDA's Ag Data Commons, where they have tried to use interoperability standards. They do use ontologies and controlled vocabularies, and I believe so does the European data portal, which is frankly I don't know too much about it. I've been trying to dig through it, but I believe that there is an effort there as well to do this. We at CGIAR are trying to also implement standards where we can. We've been working on a knowledge base called Guardian that currently makes discoverable about 200,000 publications and about 40,000 data sets from a number of different stakeholders, all of the 15 CGIAR centers, but also other stakeholders working in the agriculture for development domain particularly. But we face challenges. I mean, all of us face these kinds of challenges, those of us working in agricultural research more so perhaps than in industry. And part of this is kind of what people understand by scientific inquiry and research. There's the underlying assumption that research sort of stops at the data collection stage, and then I publish my results, I have my data, and that's it. I don't need to necessarily do anything more with the data. I mean, we're still battling that kind of attitude, but there's also sort of a deeper, perhaps, issue, and that is these two kind of conflicting views of what research and scientific inquiry really means. And so, this idea of that agricultural research, the way to do it is through sort of strict hypothesis testing kind of approach, versus the sorry, that's my dog. Versus the sort of the older Baconian approach, with the more empirical approach to understanding what's around us, which is sort of less linear and perhaps more suited towards the kinds of computational and data science approaches that we now have, where we're sort of taking large amounts of data and trying to get to a more empirical understanding of what that data is trying to tell us through machine learning kinds of approaches, through inquiring what that large pool of data is trying to tell us. That doesn't mean that these two things exist in separate silos. They certainly, you know, interact with each other. The hypothesis testing is not outside the realm of what we're doing with our data science and big data techniques for sure. But there is a sort of a bias in agricultural research towards the more strict kind of hypothesis testing approach, backed up by a lot of field work, and field work being, you know, something that lasts for multiple seasons before you can actually derive a conclusion. That is seen as very high value, and people are much less willing to share. And if they're much less willing to share, they kind of are much less willing to sort of consider making that data shareable and responsive to standards. So that is kind of an entrenched culture that is changing, but very slowly, and so that's an issue. This idea of my research, therefore my data. So I just touched on this, the agricultural rewarding researchers with much stronger field know-how, rather than kind of more quantitative or a digital approach to tackling data. This is changing, but again, that's slow as well, as because the ability to apply sort of the in silico methods that perhaps biomedical scientists have been using for a few decades now, is still relatively new in agriculture. So that's kind of an issue that we're also tackling and getting around. The ability to therefore mine large pools of data is low, and the awareness of how to do this, how to employ big data analytics is low. So, you know, just anecdotally, when we look at the kinds of hires that are made across CGIAR, for instance, it's only now, very, very recently, that we're seeing job ads go out for data scientists. Typically, it's for field agronomists, for breeders, for more, you know, the folks who are critical to what we do, but often are, you know, a little bit more skeptical or you know, have little knowledge about how to leverage big data analytics. So, and then there's of course concern about data quality and reliability, which makes people, you know, kind of question the quality of the data they find, but also I hear this a lot about, you know, reluctance to share data, and I'm always a little thrown by that, because if you're using the data to publish papers, I don't quite get the questions about quality, but they do come up, and I should add probably reproducibility to that as well. So some of the solutions that we've tried to tackle in our paper relate to relating to this question of research culture. One of the things that we've been trying to do a lot of is build capacity and institutional support to hire and to retain the kinds of skills that we need, and upskill as well as to retain the skills we need in terms of how to employ standards, but also how standards compliant pools of data can be leveraged more successfully. What is the value that you can derive from these things? How, you know, using the models that are out there, whether it's by the biomedical domain, bioinformatics, you know, increasingly trying to point to other domains that have been more successful in kind of enabling this transformational change in their particular domains. Showing the derivation and impact that can be had from data that's well described, that adheres to standards, is pretty critical in that. I think, you know, we can change minds when we show that. Encouraging best practices, budgeting and accountability, rewarding across the domain, you know, making sure that standards are used, and that they're kind of expected to be used as part of what is defined as being agricultural research is pretty critical. And then ensuring that we're pretty clear in articulating what those requirements are, what the different standards are that are expected, and then of course making them easy to be applied is a pretty critical part of that. The policy and strategy frameworks are quite important as well. So for instance, I think I have a slide on this coming up, but you know, ensuring that we have strong policy and digital strategy that make clear what these things are, and hand in hand with that is the fact that it's not just the frameworks that are important, it's also the push from our funders and from the publishers to be able to sort of overcome some of the challenges, the cultural challenges towards this. In terms of specific governance based challenges, you know, having the supportive leadership, the teams, the governance teams is often lacking in our domain. Being able to develop and maintain standards is both time and effort intensive. We all know that. And what often happens is that when there are funding cuts, budgetary, you know, bottlenecks, this is where the cuts are made. You know, it's not always seen as really important, and ties of course with my first point in terms of the valuing by leadership. That's critical in that. The collaborative development and maintenance of standards is difficult. You know, it's difficult enough to maintain the standards and develop them, but when you're doing it collaboratively, it's that much more fraught. It's very slow, and what often happens is people get tired of waiting and they go ahead and develop what they, you know, their own standard in quotes. And I've seen this a couple of times quite clearly. Related to that is, you know, the issues of who decides what a standard should encompass, what sorts of concepts should it have, and what standards to use when. How to cope with changes in data generation and processing in terms of you know, some of the newer technologies that we're seeing, the more high throughput types of technologies that we're seeing. This becomes a real problem in its own right. And then the last thing, which I cannot see, in fact, is, sorry, I'm trying to hide my thing here, which should sit here. The standards do make data easier to link, and that is what we're after for sure. But what are the repercussions for the data owners, particularly in terms of considerations of privacy, for instance? So some of those need tackling. And we propose a few solutions. Of course, valuing of open and fair data by leadership is absolutely critical. And that's backed up often by working on the policy and strategy environment. At CGR, we're doing both. And we're trying to make absolutely clear what you know, options are, what the options are for both ownership and accountability of these policies and therefore enforcement of the policy, as well as some of the strategy backing for that, making sure that the strategy outlines in a broad way what what the standards, what the digital trends are that the standards can leverage, what the standards are themselves, and how we can potentially transform the field by using them. The fact that data needs to be routinely examined and reused to generate new value is critical. And so we're trying to enable this through things like small grants programs to be able to show the value of doing this well. And then having wide-ranging support to allocate budget. Budget is a critical part of this. Internal and external frameworks for agile governance is a part of this. And so governance boards, advisory groups, et cetera. And in fact, this is something that we're advocating now through the strategy, the CGIAR digital strategy will have reference to a high-level sort of governance mechanism across the system to try and ensure some sort of uniform governance of data and data standards, both. the collaboration mechanisms to make this happen, to try and address some of the bottlenecks, to try and speed up the process through communities of practice. There's, I think, a good example in the bioinformatics community that has developed the breeding API, or BRAPI. So those are mechanisms that we would like to be able to examine and explore and leverage a bit more as we go forward. Data cooperatives are a new emerging way, emerging way to address governance and in terms of ownership issues. So, you know, the thing that I mentioned with just a couple of slides back, being able to link data means that you're also enabling or you're risking data privacy kinds of considerations that need to be addressed. And so some of these coalitions and cooperatives are just about linking with farmers, putting farmers in the driver's seat, as this visual here shows, to decide with whom they would like to share their data and when and how. But also some of them also offer value add in terms of the analytics that farmers can leverage to derive some
heading
value.
over time. Sorry, Meta, to interrupt. That we should probably switch to questions quite soon. You can wrap up.
Sure. And this will be shared with you, but I think this was my last slide, just mechanisms to develop best practices, including guidelines and ways to tackle PII, et cetera. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I apologize for going over time, but thank you.
Great, thank you. That's a really great talk to start off with. And I think both the presentation and the paper that it was based on are really great way to start this session, act as a kind of a bridge between the discussions that we've had in the previous sessions on technical standards and really how you implement those at the level of a very complex network of institutional structures. It involves a lot of different solutions, as you were saying, verging from the kind of the policy level to the community of practice level. So on that point, if we can open it to questions right now, if we have raised hands from panelists, or if anyone wants to add questions in the chat or Q&A.